It's undeniable. These days, it seems like cozy games are everywhere. From the myriad of farming games, relaxing town builders, sorting games, and cute rhythm games, it seems like cozy games have cemented themselves as the new trending genre. Even I'm working on releasing my own cozy game. But where did they come from, and why now? First of all, it's important to define what exactly we mean by a cozy game. For the purposes of the video, we can consider a cozy game to be one that strips away the traditional focus of video games on testing some ability of the player, be it their reflexes or their intellect, and instead places an emphasis on giving the player an experience that more closely replicates relaxing everyday pleasures. The other key aspect of these games is an emphasis on a relaxed, upbeat, or even outright cutesy aesthetic, shying away from the more adult, quote-unquote realistic themes that have begun to permeate video games in the last few decades. These are the two core elements of what defines a cozy game. Now that we have a definition in place, let's take a look at the factors which have brought about this surge in the popularity of these types of games. Human beings are naturally influenced and inspired by the works that they consume, and video games are no different. There's a life cycle of trends that has permeated throughout gaming history, which has been described excellently by Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit in his video, Do We Need a Souls-like Genre? First of all, some early titles established the basic concepts or ideas in an emerging genre. Secondly, one or a small handful of seminal works are released that achieve great critical or commercial success. Thirdly, other developers, either inspired by the work or more cynically trying to cash in on its success, release works that borrow many of the elements of the seminal work. Finally, the original work and the subsequent imitations are boiled down to its core essential elements, and then a new genre is born. In my view, this is the process that the cozy game genre is undergoing, and this is where we stand on the timeline. So what were these early titles exactly? Well, in the case of cozy gaming, there has been a rather drawn-out history in comparison to some of these other genres. The full history is beyond the scope of this video, but the emergence of these concepts can be seen in many places, and most notably in the Animal Crossing and Harvest Moon series. Now let's take a look at step 2. What was the seminal work in the cozy game genre? Well, in my opinion, there's two: Animal Crossing New Horizons and Stardew Valley. While the base concepts of both of these games have been around for decades now, one must simply take a look at the sales figures to see that the release of these games was qualitatively different to those earlier works. In the case of Animal Crossing, New Horizons sold more copies than every other game in the series combined. While I couldn't find exact sales figures for Harvest Moon, at the time of making this video, Stardew Valley has sold over 20 million copies, and so it's safe to assume that the sales of this game have far outstripped that of any of the Harvest Moon games that preceded it. We can see then that the release of these two games was the first time that this cozy genre has penetrated into the popular consciousness. As I mentioned before, with success comes imitators. For anybody following the video game news cycle, it's been impossible to ignore the sheer quantity of games releasing in the past couple of years that closely follow the farming formula set down first by Harvest Moon and then refined by Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley first released in 2016, and a typical video game development cycle usually takes at least 3 years, usually closer to 5. Therefore, we are just now beginning to see the release of games that began development around the time of, and as a result of, Stardew Valley's release. As Animal Crossing New Horizons released a few years later in 2020, by my estimation, it will still be a couple of years before we begin to see the flood of games that closely follow the formula set down by that game. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is a fourth step in this process, and we've already begun to see the release of games that go beyond imitation and instead focused on the two core elements that we identified earlier. One emerging subgenre is that of sorting away items, such as in games like Unpacking and A Little to the Left. I'm sure that in years to come, and with more original takes on the cozy formula, we'll finally begin to see this style of game blossom into a genre of its own. While this is, in my view, the factor that is having the greatest influence on the emergence of this trend, there is one more factor for us to look at, which has really created the perfect storm that has pushed this genre into the stratosphere. While it may come as a surprise to some, since the birth of video games, The world's geopolitical situation has and continues to play a role in video games and the trends that we see emerging. One great example of this, as noted by Ahoy in his excellent Nuclear Fruit series, is how the Cold War played an outset effect on early video games, with many games of the period taking an interest in outer space during the space race, as well as anxiety about invasions or nuclear war. In my view, the effect of geopolitics on video game trends doesn't stop here. The 80s and 90s respectively saw an easing of Cold War tensions, and the end of the Cold War and the optimism about a more peaceful world. This is reflected by the colourful, almost childlike games that were most successful in this era. Similarly, the start of armed conflicts in the Middle East in the early 2000s saw a surge in the interest in war games, reaching its peak just a few years after these events took place. Now, coming off the back of a once-in-a-century pandemic, and with geopolitical tensions with Russia on the rise again, we could consider the rise of the cozy game genre to be, for the first time, a reaction against the zeitgeist. With concepts such as doom scrolling entering the collective consciousness, people are now more aware than ever on how the media that they choose to consume affects their mental well-being, and so cozy games offer a form of escape. In this era of gaming, where genres rise and fall, cozy games have made their mark as an alternative, offering a respite from the complexities of our reality. Time will only tell where the genre will go next, but one thing is for certain, and that is that cozy games are here to stay. Thanks for watching, everyone. As I mentioned at the start, I'm also working on my own cozy game. If you're interested in finding out more about this game, be sure to check out the trailer and wishlist the game on Steam. I'm also pleased to announce that I am now on Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel. Depending on your tier, you can gain early access to my videos, as well as downloads for Unity projects for all of my videos, and demo builds for any games that I am working on. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.